Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, inshallah, I'd like to review Christopher Marlowe as a poet and a playwright. Christopher Marlowe was a contemporary of William Shakespeare, and he was his chief competitor in a way in Elizabethan times. Christopher Marlowe and Sir Walter Raleigh were friends, and Sir Walter Raleigh actually helped Christopher Marlowe published his 7 plays that he wrote in his lifetime. Christopher Marlowe met an early death and he died in 1593 before he could do more. Sir Walter Raleigh, as I stated, helped him out in publishing, just like he helped out Edmund Spenser publish his Fairy Queen, dedicated to Elizabeth I near the same time. So Walter Raleigh, as he recalls the ceremony, meaning he was knighted by the Queen herself, was in the service of Queen Elizabeth, and he was in her court and part of her administration, so to speak. And we shall, in this section, study a poem by Christopher Marlowe and a reply to that poem by Sir Walter Raleigh. But it's important to appreciate that Christopher Marlowe and Sir Walter Raleigh, Edmund Spenser, and Shakespeare were all contemporaries. And Christopher Marlowe was a great influence on Shakespeare. We shall study one of his pastoral poems. A pastoral poem is a poem about set in pastoral landscape, pastoral referring to rural area, country life, and they usually deal with shepherds and their love, and they idealize the shepherd's life and make it kind of romantic, so to speak. The word pastoral itself is derived from Latin and meaning shepherd, and it idealizes the life of in the country, in the pastoral area. And the poem that we shall study is called "The Passionate Shepherd to His Love," where a shepherd who writes a poem to his beloved, making his plea. So this is the Christopher Marlowe's poem that we shall study. That is an example of a pastoral poem. Then we shall study an example of what's called a coterie writing, C-O-T-E-R-I-E writing. Now, the word coterie means like a group, right? So it's kind of like a WhatsApp group. See, in the old days, then people who had similar taste, they would pass their poetry from one person to another person in this group, and that group is called a coterie. So, and then those individuals would edit or sometimes reply to that piece of writing, and that's called coterie writing, almost like sending letters back and forth. So this particular poem, the Passionate Shepherd to His Love poem, apparently elicited many responses from different individuals, and the most famous of this response apparently is none other than Sir Walter Raleigh's response, and that response is called the Nymph's Reply. The nymph here meaning a beautiful girl, the reply to the shepherd, and this is an example of a coterie writing. Here in the Nymph's Reply, she's a smart, pragmatic woman who's not impressed by the wooing of the passionate shepherd. Now, these poems are so run in parallel. If you look at them over here, this is the passionate shepherd's to his love, Christopher Marlowe and Sir Walter Raleigh's reply, the Nymph's reply to the shepherd. They so parallel each other that even the paragraphs corroborate in this case. So this paragraph, for example, is a reply to this paragraph, and this paragraph is a reply to this paragraph, and this paragraph is a reply to this paragraph. and I will make thee beds of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies, fragrant flowers. He's saying, if you come and be with me, and says, I'll make you a bed of roses and 1,000 fragrant flowers. And then she says, the flowers do fade in wanton fields, to wayward winter reckoning yields. It's like, yeah, fine, but you know what? I know better. The flowers don't last very long. What's going to happen when we grow older, right? And is this love going to last? She's a very smart, pragmatic woman. So this is an example of a reply to a poem, and this is an example of a coterie writing where their authors go back and forth like that, sometimes for amusement. So we learn about pastoral poems by studying one of the poems from Christopher Marlowe, but Christopher Marlowe is really known for his plays and the influence they had on other writers, including William Shakespeare. There are two important, I guess there are several important, but there are two important things that he did in regards to plays that are very important. The first is that he disregarded this concept of he disregarded this concept of unities. Okay, so he disregarded this concept of unities. This is very important. The concept of unities in plays is a classical concept. When you say classical, whenever you say classical in writing, it refers to like the Roman times and the Greek times. Okay, so this classical concept, and this was an Aristotelian concept, okay, said that for a play to be effective, and Aristotle had an opinion about many things, including this, for a play to be effective, it has to be have certain unity of time and place. Okay, in other words, the play can't be jumping around in different eras. Like you can't tell the story of a person when they were small and then they jump around and tell the story of a person when they were adult or something. In fact, they believe that the story must limit itself to a plot line that lasts 24 hours. Okay, and it should belong in one place. And so Walter Wiley and Shakespeare afterward, they disregarded this concept of unities. For example, the segments of the play that we're going to study, the tragical history of Dr. Faustus. For example, forget 24 hours. This play lasts 24 years. Okay, see, Dr. Faustus sells his soul to the devil for 24 years, he says, because after 24 years of devil serving him, Dr. Faustus would have to give up his soul to the devil, so that the devil can take him to hell, because he wants to cause maximum misery to mankind. So this is a 24 years, forget 24 hours of the concept of unities, and this plays plot lines in different parts of Europe, so it travels quite a bit. So one of the things that Christopher Marlowe is to disregarded this concept of unities. It's very important. The second thing that he did was that he popularized blank verse. Okay. The blank verse is a concept, he didn't invent it, but he popularized blank verse. A blank verse is unrhyming, okay, unrhymed iambic pentameter. Okay, in other words, the ending of the lines don't rhyme, so it's an unrhymed iambic pentameter. Short while, long while, short while, long while, short while, long while, short while, long while, short while, long. 5 of them. So he popularized this iambic pentameter, and for example, to be or not to be, okay, or not to be? That is the question, for example. That's iambic pentameter. So a unrhymed iambic pentameter is called a blank verse. It's much easier to write, of course, in a blank verse than it's to try to make sure that every single line, has some rhyme scheme or something like that. So he, as I said, he didn't invent this, but he popularized this, and the blank verse. And these two things were directly adopted by Shakespeare and many others. Now, I'm just going to make a few comments about Dr. Faustus before I finish here. This is a legend of the story that did not originate in him. It's not an original story of Christopher Marlowe. In fact, the story apparently originated in England. The tragical history of Dr. Faustus, but he wrote his own version of the story. So what happens here is there's a certain Dr. Faustus, who's a doctor of divinity, very educated person, but he's not happy was not happy, and he has a lot of pride, and he actually kind of wants to rule the world, and but he can't seem to be able to do it. So what he does, he conjures up the shaitan and the devil, and the shaitan doesn't come to him right away, but he's like, his spokesperson, Mephistopheles, comes to him. Now it's important to understand that the devils don't call on Faustus. The Faustus calls on the devils. So it's his pride, his greed and desire that results in his fall. And Mephistopheles is a little devil who works for Lucifer, who's the shaitan, and then so it's entirely, he has no one to blame except for himself. As I said, he sells his soul to the devil for 24 years of his service, and which means that he will learn the black magic from the shaitan. So he in his attempts to conquer the world, and he doesn't learn enough, and what he's learning is disappointed, and in fact he does not ever obviously achieve his original purpose. So the what he learns ends up being some cheap tricks, and that he can play on people, and extremely disappointed. And in the end, though, when the time comes, and he can't take it back, and he's dragged to Jahannam, to hell. This story it's long, and it has also some subplots or plots. His big plot, big story, and then there's some small story. Sometimes these small subplots are used for comic relief, because the story itself has some very major themes, and these subplots, comic relief to ease some tension in the audience. And they're called low comedy, meaning like silly stuff. Sometimes you read Shakespeare, you wonder why there's all this silly stuff in there. But you must also remember these are plays being performed in front of an audience. If you had a 2.5 hour play of serious things, people emotionally would get exhausted. So there is this low comedic relief, silly comedy relief that occurs. One of the things that happens in the characteristics of this plays are soliloquies. Soliloquies, Soliloquy. Perhaps the most famous of the soliloquies is Hamlet's "To Be or Not to Be." So soliloquies are like a single actor on stage, kind of talking out loud, thinking out loud. So this way, the audience knows what the character is thinking, and the audience is able to learn about what other characters are thinking and doing. So soliloquies are basically when there is one character on stage delivering a solo, SOLO, a solo speech by himself to the audience. It's a great way of audience to get into the mind of the character. Otherwise, how else would the audience get into the mind of a character that is on stage? Okay, and Dr. Faustus is ultimately a religious play, right? Because it has to do with the devil and like that. But the play itself is so complex, and it's very hard to pin out which Christian sect Christopher Marlowe favored in the end. But anyways, that's a brief plot line for the tragic history of Dr. Faustus. And inshallah, next time we'll continue talking about the remainder of these Elizabethan authors that we shall study. Until then, as-salatu wa-salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi. Assalamu alaikum.